trenches, machine guns, poison gas, barbed wire, and imagine a world on the edge of collapse, where a single gunshot in a small European city would set off a chain reaction that dragged nations across oceans into the bloodiest conflict humanity had ever seen. This is the story of the First World War, the war that changed everything, and the war that shaped the America we know today. Welcome to our channel, where history comes alive. If you're fascinated by the battles, the politics, and the human stories that define the past, you're in the right place. Today, we dive deep into the origins of World War I, how it started, how it escalated, and how America, once determined to stay out, would eventually be pulled into the fight. Stay tuned until the end, because this isn't just history. It's the story of how the modern world was born. The year was 1914. Europe was a powder keg, an armed continent bristling with rivalries, old grudges, and fragile alliances. For decades, tensions had been rising among the great powers: Germany, Austria-Hungary, Russia, France, and Britain. Behind the scenes, militarism, nationalism, and imperial ambition created an atmosphere where war felt inevitable, waiting only for a spark. That spark came on June 28, 1914, in the city of Sarajevo. Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the throne of Austria-Hungary, rode through the streets in an open car beside his wife, Sophie. It was supposed to be a ceremonial visit. Instead, it became a date burned into history. A group of young Bosnian Serb nationalists, members of a group known as the Black Hand, waited in an ambush. One attempt to assassinate the Archduke failed when a grenade bounced off his car. But fate had other plans. Later that morning, as the royal couple's car took a wrong turn down a side street, a 19-year-old named Gavrilo Princip stepped forward. He pulled the trigger. 2 shots rang out. Franz Ferdinand and his wife slumped in their seats dead. Those bullets did not just kill an heir, they ignited the world. Austria-Hungary blamed Serbia, the small Slavic nation they believed supported the assassins. Backed by their powerful ally Germany, Austria-Hungary delivered an ultimatum to Serbia. Serbia agreed to most of the demands, but not all. That was enough. On July 28, 1914, Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia. The dominoes began to fall. Russia, protector of the Slavic people, mobilized to defend Serbia. Germany, bound by its alliance, declared war on Russia. France, tied to Russia, prepared for battle. And when German troops marched through neutral Belgium to strike France, Britain declared war on Germany. In just days, the entire continent of Europe was engulfed in flames. What began as a localized conflict between Austria-Hungary and Serbia had exploded into a world war. The armies of Europe marched off to war with confidence. Young men cheered, flags waved, and leaders promised it would be over by Christmas. But they had no idea of the nightmare awaiting them. Trenches, machine guns, poison gas, barbed wire, and death on an industrial scale. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, the United States watched. President Woodrow Wilson declared neutrality, urging Americans to remain impartial in thought as well as in action. For now, this was Europe's war. But the world was shrinking fast, and America would not stay on the sidelines forever. The summer of 1914 turned into a brutal stalemate. The German army swept through Belgium, advancing deep into France. The Allies pushed back at the Battle of the Marne, halting the German advance just miles from Paris. But instead of quick victory, the war bogged down into a grinding struggle neither side could escape. Both armies dug in. From the North Sea to Switzerland, a line of trenches scarred the landscape. This was the Western Front, a frozen battlefield of mud, barbed wire, and misery that would define the Great War. Life in the trenches was hell. Soldiers lived knee-deep in mud and water. Rats and lice thrived. Food was scarce, sleep was fleeting, and the constant pounding of artillery became the soundtrack of their lives. When the whistles blew, men climbed out of the trenches into no man's land, a barren stretch between the lines littered with corpses and shattered trees. Machine guns cut them down by the thousands. The old ways of war had collided with new technology. Rapid-fire machine guns mowed down charging infantry. Heavy artillery unleashed thunderous barrages that obliterated entire villages. Poison gas choked soldiers in their trenches, burning their lungs and eyes. Barbed wire tangled men like fish in a net. Airplanes circled above, first for scouting, later dropping bombs. And on the horizon, strange armored beasts, the first tanks, crawled across the battlefield. This was industrial war. A war not of knights and glory, but of factories, steel, and machines grinding men into the mud. By Christmas of 1914, the hope of a short war was dead. The Western Front became a slaughterhouse that claimed millions. But the war was not confined to Europe. Battles raged in Africa, the Middle East, and the seas. The Ottoman Empire joined the Central Powers, clashing with Britain and Russia. In the deserts of Arabia, a young British officer named T. Lawrence, later remembered as Lawrence of Arabia, helped stir Arab revolts against Ottoman rule. On the oceans, the German Navy tried to strangle Britain with submarines. The dreaded U-boats prowled the Atlantic, sinking merchant ships without warning. It was a brutal campaign of unrestricted submarine warfare, one that would eventually push America closer to war. Yet in these early years, the United States remained neutral. President Woodrow Wilson believed America should be a voice of peace, not war. Many Americans agreed. Why should young men from Kansas or New York die in Europe's quarrels? But neutrality was easier said than done. America was a land of immigrants, millions, with ties to Britain, Germany, Ireland, and beyond. Some Americans cheered for the Allies, others for the Central Powers. Newspapers argued, communities divided, and the nation's heart pulled in different directions. Meanwhile, American banks and businesses sold food, weapons, and supplies, mostly to the Allies. Neutral in name, the U.S. was already economically tied to Britain and France. And when German U-boats began sinking ships with American passengers on board, neutrality grew harder to defend. The world was at war, and slowly but surely, America was being drawn toward it. By 1915, the war in Europe had already claimed hundreds of thousands of lives. But for most Americans, it was still a distant nightmare. That changed on May 7, 1915, when the luxury liner RMS Lusitania set sail from New York, bound for Liverpool. On board were nearly 2,000 passengers, including more than 100 Americans. Off the coast of Ireland, a German U-boat lurked in the waters. Without warning, a torpedo struck the ship. In just 80 minutes, the Lusitania sank beneath the waves, taking more than 1,100 lives with it, including 128 Americans. The news shocked the world. In the United States, headlines screamed of German brutality. Families wept. Outrage boiled. President Woodrow Wilson condemned the attack, but stopped short of war. Instead, he demanded Germany curb its submarine warfare. For a time, Germany pulled back, unwilling to push America too far. But the damage was done. The illusion of safety across the Atlantic was gone. Wilson campaigned for re-election in 1916 with the slogan, "He kept us out of war." And indeed, America stayed neutral for now. But beneath the surface, the pressure mounted. American ships continued carrying goods to Britain and France. German U-boats resumed attacks. And then came the telegram that changed everything. In January 1917, British intelligence intercepted a secret message from the German Foreign Minister, Arthur Zimmermann, to Mexico. The proposal was shocking. If Mexico joined Germany against the United States, it would be rewarded with the return of Texas, Arizona, and New Mexico. When the British revealed the Zimmermann telegram to Washington, many Americans thought it was a hoax. But it was real. and when newspapers published it, outrage swept the nation. The idea that Germany was plotting to stir war on American soil was the final straw. Meanwhile, German U-boats resumed unrestricted warfare, sinking American ships in the Atlantic. By the spring of 1917, neutrality was dead. On April 2, 1917, President Woodrow Wilson addressed Congress. His words were solemn, deliberate, and historic. The world must be made safe for democracy. 4 days later, the United States formally declared war on Germany. The sleeping giant had awakened. But declaring war was one thing, fighting it was another. The U.S. Army was small, barely a fraction of Europe's massive forces. America needed to raise, train, and equip millions of men. The Selective Service Act of 1917 drafted young Americans by the hundreds of thousands. Factories shifted into wartime production, churning out rifles, helmets, uniforms, and supplies. Women entered the workforce in record numbers. Posters urged citizens to buy Liberty bonds to fund the war. The nation transformed almost overnight. The United States was not just sending soldiers, it was mobilizing the power of industry, wealth, and manpower on a scale the world had never seen. By 1918, American troops known as the Doughboys were arriving in France by the hundreds of thousands. They brought fresh energy, morale, and determination to the exhausted Allies. For 3 long years, Britain and France had bled and broken against the German war machine. Now, with American help, the balance began to shift. The U.S. soldiers fought in key battles: Cantigny, Belleau Wood, the Marne, and the Meuse-Argonne offensive. At Belleau Wood, the Marines earned their legend, refusing to retreat and declaring, "Retreat? How? We just got here." Their ferocity shocked the Germans and inspired the Allies. The arrival of American forces was more than manpower, it was a symbol. It told the world that the tide was turning, that Germany's dream of victory was slipping away. By the fall of 1918, the German army was exhausted, its people starving, its allies collapsing. And with American forces pressing forward alongside the Allies, the end drew near. By the summer of 1918, the tide of the war had turned. German forces launched one last desperate offensive on the Western Front, hoping to break through before American troops arrived in full strength. For a moment, it seemed like they might succeed, but the Allies, now reinforced by fresh American divisions, pushed them back. In the Second Battle of the Marne, American and French troops counterattacked, halting the German advance for good. From that moment, the Allies seized the initiative. In battle after battle, the Americans proved their resolve, fighting through forests, rivers, and fortified lines. The largest American operation of the war came in the Meuse-Argonne offensive, beginning in September 1918. More than 1 million American soldiers surged forward, facing barbed wire, trenches, and relentless machine gun fire. Casualties were staggering, but the Doughboys pushed on, grinding down the German army. For Germany, the end was clear. Their allies were collapsing, their people starving, and their soldiers weary of endless bloodshed. On November 11, 1918, at the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, the guns finally fell silent. The armistice had been signed. After 4 years of slaughter, World War I was over. The cost was almost unimaginable. More than 16 million dead and 20 million wounded. Cities reduced to rubble. An entire generation scarred by trench mud and memories of horror. For the United States, more than 116,000 American soldiers had given their lives, and over 200,000 more were wounded. They had crossed the ocean to fight in a foreign war, and in doing so, they had helped tip the balance toward victory. When President Woodrow Wilson traveled to Europe in 1919, he carried a vision for a new world. His 14 points called for peace without revenge, self-determination for nations, and a League of Nations to prevent future wars. It was an ambitious dream of lasting peace. But reality was harsher. At the Treaty of Versailles, the Allies imposed heavy punishments on Germany: territorial losses, military restrictions, and crushing reparations. Many Germans saw it not as peace, but as humiliation. Wilson fought to bring the League of Nations to life, but back home, the U.S. Senate rejected it. America, weary of war, turned inward. Yet, even without joining the League, America had changed forever. Before the war, the U.S. had been seen as a distant power, content to stay on its side of the ocean. After 1918, no one could ignore America's role. Its industry, its wealth, and its soldiers had helped decide the outcome of the greatest conflict the world had ever known. The war had launched the United States onto the world stage. World War I was called the war to end all wars. It did not. Only 2 decades later, the world would plunge into an even greater conflict. But the First World War had already redrawn the map, toppled empires, and set the course of the 20th century. And for America, it was the moment it stepped forward, not as a bystander, but as a global power whose choices would shape the world for generations to come. Thank you for watching. The story of World War I is not just about battles and treaties. It is about the human cost of war, the courage of ordinary soldiers, and the choices that shaped our future. If you found this journey through history eye-opening, don't forget to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more deep-dive history documentaries. Together, we'll keep the past alive and uncover the stories that continue to shape our world today.